Well, new OSHA data shows that Amazon, the second largest private employer in the country, is a leader in on-the-job injuries. The data also reveals that Amazon jobs are often more dangerous than the same jobs at other warehouses.
Democratic strategist and senior VP at Firehouse Strategies, Michael Starr Hopkins, and senior news producer at the Daily Signal and visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, Kelsey Bolar, join us now to discuss. Michael, were you surprised by this?
No, I'm not surprised by this. I mean, Amazon has had a lot of issues when it comes to labor and kind of their work practices. And if I'm being honest, I think across the country, we've got a real problem with our relationship to work and workers and how we treat our workers. And so I think, Amazon is an example of companies that really need to be reined in terms of how they treat their workers.
Kelsey, I mean, I could just toss the same question to you. Were you surprised by this? And then let me add on to that. What's the conservative response in an era where some of these major corporations are, I think, being so irresponsible with their management and with their workers? How, as a conservative, is there a way to sort of figure out a response to companies like Amazon's track records, which I think are increasingly negative?
I'm not sure if I'm more surprised by the fact that there are widespread workplace injuries in Amazon workplaces, or the fact that Jeff Bezos' own newspaper, Washington Post, decided to report on it. Good for them. I am happy to see that. That said, I agree that Amazon does have a host of problems, and despite the convenience that they provide to all of us, especially during the pandemic, I think we need to recognize that Amazon did enable a lot of us to stay home and safe, thanks to its delivery services and its selfless employees who continue to work. They do have a lot of work to do themselves to ensure their own factory workers are happy, are safe, and it doesn't appear that that is always the case. I certainly think the conservative movement has woken up to a new reality, perhaps not reflected even just a few years ago, where we do need to be a stronger voice for these workers to ensure they not only have good paying jobs, but safe jobs. And jobs that entail accountability for these massive employers who sometimes it can feel like it's very hard to have any sort of accountability. But how interesting, looking at this report that we know just a couple weeks, if not months ago, down in Georgia, Amazon workers voted against joining a union. So I think we need to look forward to more creative ways for employees to make their voices heard and ensure that they do have their own workplace safety. And conservatives absolutely should be a part of that conversation.
Well, one of those creative ways is to produce a fairer process and Kelsey, I want to get your reaction to this, and then Michael, if you want to, is to create a fair way for those workers to organize a union. Now, the reporting that came out of that Bessemer plant, showed that there were all sorts of different unfair and intimidating tactics that the company used to dissuade people from voting to join the union. If the PRO Act had been passed and was in law at the time, those workers could challenge those unfair practices, and if they were upheld by the NLRB, then they would move to card check. They would move to just signing cards and saying, look, we do actually want to be part of a union. And if there was a union, I think a lot of the injuries that you'd see would be mitigated because they would have to come up with protocols around these processes.
You have to acknowledge the reasons that these workers voted down joining a union. Unions are an outdated model of dealing with legitimate employee grievances. Furthermore, they leave employees stuck into an outdated model of employment where they are very tied down to a traditional 9-to-5 union job that doesn't give them much flexibility. Sure, it might come with these benefits that on paper sound good, but in reality, especially after this pandemic, Americans have recognized the value of flexible work arrangements and being able to negotiate your own terms with your employer. trade in certain benefits for more flexible hours or more time off. I can tell you as a working mother, flexibility is my #1 priority. And the PRO Act is the #1 threat to this type of workplace flexibility because it attempts to force millions of Americans into a 9-to-5 union job, leaving them with no choice, not only whether they join that union, but the type of employment arrangements they can negotiate from there, because it is a one-size-fits-all for a country that is made up of all types of unique situations and circumstances. American families, especially parents, need to be able to negotiate their own terms for themselves and not just follow this one-size-fits-all option.
Now, Michael, what's your response to this point about the PRO Act?
Look, I mean, I first let me say that if it weren't for unions, we wouldn't have 5-day work weeks. We wouldn't have, protections to keep children from, working on factory lines anymore. And yeah, there certainly need to be some changes to how unions operate, but no individual has the bargaining power to be able to bargain individually against Amazon or against GM or any of these large companies. So the ability to be able to negotiate together in a union, I think, is, one of the most American things we have. And so the PRO Act, what it does is try to protect that and make it so that these big companies aren't able to manipulate the process of forming a union like they did in Alabama, where they started putting, drop boxes that weren't the actual drop box. And they started intimidating workers and telling them that there wasn't going to be a plant anymore if they unionized. And those kind of tactics are the ones that suppress the ability of workers to be able to collectively bargain. So, I think there's certainly criticisms within the political prescriptions of this. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that Americans are having a fair opportunity to get a job, to have a living wage, to have health care, all of which are done through the union process.
Right, and a lot of warehouses actually are unionized, and as we said at the top of the show, Amazon has a disproportionate number of injuries relative to even other warehouses. So you can't just say, well, there's more workers, so there's more injuries. No, even relative to other warehouses, and a significant amount of that is explained by the fact that these other warehouses have protections because they are unionized. And Kelsey, what would be the response to that?
Well, first off, if Amazon workers wanted to be unionized, more of them would be. Many of them realize, again, unions are an outdated model and not necessary to advocate. Look at the fact that we're even talking about this report. Workers realize they do have power. It's certainly they need to pursue more creative ways, but they've realized they can go to legislators. Both on the right and the left are concerned, especially when it comes to a giant company like Amazon. Our leaders care about how those employees are treated and whether this company is taking advantage of its workforce. Furthermore, they can go to the media and expose any type of mistreatment. And ultimately, Amazon isn't going to have employees if it is truly mistreating its workers. These are good paying jobs to begin with. Amazon deserves some credit on that front, but I absolutely agree. They have work to do, and I'm glad to see every time the media reports on any sort of mistreatment or problems in these warehouses, it is a step towards improving working conditions for these workers that does not force them into these one-size-fits-all, outdated union models that threaten so many more American workers beyond just those at Amazon. It threatens small business owners who can't afford all the restrictions that the PRO Act would mandate on them. I've done a lot of reporting and talking to small business owners myself, and I know how detrimental this could be to our freelance workforce, which thrives on flexibility and creativity. This pro-union model, like mandated by the PRO Act, would absolutely quash that.
Well, and of course, it's the big businesses that have the resources to fulfill all of these new regulatory requirements, and that, you know, goes downstream to small businesses in a very difficult way. Kelsey, I like your framing about the sort of outdated model. We started off this block talking about OSHA, which is something that didn't exist, and unions have scored many victories for workers over the course of decades, but we are now in, I think, a different time. This has been a fascinating conversation. We appreciate you guys so much. Next on Rising is friend of the show, Brianna Joy Gray. Stick around for that.